Suit up and hold on to your heads because we have the second scariest Frank on Netflix next to this guy.
There is but one rule. Hunt or be hunted.
With less than a week until the release of the new season of The Punisher, I thought it'd be fun to see where we left off in Season 1 and explain what really happened in that bloody finale. Season 1 ended with an absolutely brutal fight between Frank Castle, aka The Punisher, and best friend turned backstabbing asshole Billy Russo.
That's not a knife. That's a knife.
Frank ultimately gains the upper hand and, rather than kill Billy, shoves his face into shards of glass so that he can live with the reminder of the pain he's caused. In the trailer for Season 2, it looks like he'll definitely be back. But that choice, to let someone evil like Billy live, is a new one for Frank, and it's important in understanding Frank as a character and where he might be heading into Season 2. The entire season, Frank goes on and on about how he'll kill anyone who gets in his way, but with Billy, he doesn't go through with it. The most evil of them all, and he doesn't do it. To understand this decision, we have to go all the way back to Episode 1. In Episode 1, Frank is in a dark place, reeling from the death of his family, using a secret alias, living in a shitty apartment, and constantly harassed by his fellow construction co-workers who call him a retard. Frank is lost, unsure what life has in store for him, rattled by grief with no will to live. He even keeps his head down, trying not to get involved with potential new friends like Donnie, because everyone he gets close to seems to die. And what better metaphor to show the barriers Frank needs to overcome than a concrete wall? The wall is his guilt. The belief that he was responsible for the death of his wife and children. We see him violently chip away at it, to the point where his hands become a bloody mess. His last name, Castle, alludes to the impenetrable walls of medieval castles, but instead of keeping out foreign invaders, for Frank it's the pain and emotions. Guilt is one of the biggest themes this season. Almost every character has some form of it. Frank for the death of his family, and also how he treated his son. In a flashback, he laments how he scolded his son on a ferry ride, and when his son was younger, chastised him for drawing a picture of a Marine on the wall, not realizing he drew it because he wanted to be just like his dad. He also feels responsible for Curtis losing his leg. He couldn't shoot the pregnant woman who had a bomb in Afghanistan, which led to the loss of it. The name The Punisher not only relates to how Frank treats his victims, but how he treats himself. He is punished every day by the memory of his dead family. It haunts him. Other characters, such as David Lieberman, aka Micro, who ends up joining Frank in his crusade, feels the guilt of not being there for his family. The torture of watching them without being with them is a common thread throughout the season. David's wife, Sarah, drinks copious amounts of wine during the day to cover the guilt she has over not being able to manage her children.
So you're not going to judge me for appreciating little Rosé.
Her son she even finds carrying a knife around in his backpack. A plot point which ends up leading to one of the most interesting and emotional scenes in the season. Officer Dina Madani has guilt over the death of her partner Sam Stein, who was killed by Billy Russo on a fake decoy op that was entirely her plan. But the person who doesn't show any signs of guilt at all? You guessed it, Billy Russo. In fact, he's pretty remorseless.
It's pretty now.
The writers even added scenes that technically do not add to the plot at all, just to flesh out how evil this guy is. For example, in episode 8, we find out that Billy has his heroin addict mother tied to the hospital bed to live in torment for the rest of her life. He's a keeper, Madani. Frank is equally ruthless, but what differentiates him from Billy is that he has a code. He kills only the bad and isn't interested in power or money like Billy is. Take how the two of them approach situations in which they need to escape. In episode 7, when Frank flees from the military base, he's stopped by a young soldier. Instead of just taking him out, Frank warns him. He doesn't want to hurt him. Contrast that to Billy, who completely goes on a rampage when leaving Anvil to fight Frank.
Cool guys don't look at explosions.
But everything comes to a head when Frank and Billy face off at the carousel, the same location Frank's family was brutally murdered. And Billy knows this. This trauma, PTSD if you will give Billy an upper hand since Frank must not only fight Billy, but his own demons if he's going to win the day. And the carousel is personified by Frank himself. Both go around in circles. It never goes anywhere, just round and round. It's usually a symbol of youth and innocence. There are even 2 young employees who are tied up as hostages, but here the carousel is one of blood and violence. After the vicious battle between Frank and Billy, Frank lets Billy live, stating,
"Time's easy."
This whole season has culminated in this decision. Frank has learned that the pain of living with loss far outweighs the easy way out of killing yourself. The pain of waking up and looking for your loved ones only to be reminded that they are dead is a hell in and of itself. So he decides to completely tear apart Billy's face as a reminder of him. In fact, this notion of him being a reminder is brought up in episode 12. After being brought to the brink of death, Frank experiences visions of himself and his wife. She encourages him to come with her, which would mean his death, but Frank decides to push through. Dying is the coward's way out. He must fight, and after he kills Rollins, he proclaims that he will live on as a reminder. On the other hand, we have Billy, who pleads with Frank to kill him. He'd rather die than live and be reminded of what Frank did to him. But Frank knows it would be worse for Billy to let him live. That is his punishment. As he says in episode 3,
People think that torture is pain. It's not pain. It's time. It's time. Slowly realize that your life is over. It's over. Leave me. Now all you got is the nightmare.
he wants Billy to live in this torture. What this show does well is slowly create change in Frank. It doesn't happen like a flip of a switch. He has to see for himself the error of his worldview before he can truly change. My favorite example of this is when Frank teaches David's son a lesson by holding a knife to his neck. Ah, good father-son talk. We learn the reason the kid had the knife in the first place was that he was lonely and sad, and that he wanted to make others feel bad like he does. What better mirror to hold up to Frank, who essentially does the same thing? And mirrors are often symbols of confronting our inner selves, like the mirrors both Billy and Frank look into at the carousels, mirrors which Frank avoids in episode 1, but must confront in episode 13.
You really look in the mirror, you gotta admit who you are. But not just to yourself, you to everybody else.
So while The Punisher may be a shoot-'em-up action extravaganza, it's also the story of a man struggling with grief, trying to overcome loss and move on. Because if you don't, you'll just end up on that carousel, round and round, until it's too late. Thanks everyone for watching. I got a whole bunch more stuff coming up near the end of January, and I'm hoping to do an analysis of Season 2, so make sure you're subscribed with the bell on to get my latest videos. We're almost at 100K, so a huge thank you to everyone who's been along for the ride. And remember, Daddy loves you very much.